Do you want to know what the fallen are, little one? In a sense, they are angels, but not the angels your mom imagines she prays to. Brass trumpets picnicking in the clouds. In their true essence, they are great swirling engines of wing and blood, fiery eyes that peer around the corners between worlds. Dark, radiant things conjured from fresh battlefields. A Frankenstein's Valkyrie, forever crashing to Midgard. What grief demands their hate? What vast cannibal hunger?
Welcome to the Fallen Cycle Mythos podcast. This is a universe full of secrets, waiting for those brave or foolhardy enough to seek them out. Cycle 1. Tales from When I Had a Face was written and produced by James Curcio, with editing by Brian Johnson. A modern fairy tale about death, loss, and finding redemption in the strangest places for those of us still haunted by the uncertain, occult logic of dreams. The fully illustrated black and white edition of this book is available at Amazon.com. The soundtrack features the work of David Bessel, along with additional contributions credited in the individual episode notes. Support for this project is pivotal. By becoming a patron at patreon.com/mythosmedia, that's MYTHOS media, you enable us to make more content like this and to be able to hire on more freelance artists in future works. Discover more about the transmedia Mythpunk Fallen Cycle universe at fallencycle.com. This podcast contains adult themes and may induce psychosis. And now, this week's episode. Season 3. The Winter Tree. What is life? A frenzy. An illusion, a fiction, a passing shadow, and the greatest good the merest dot, for all of life's a dream, and dreams themselves are only part of dreaming. Pedro Calderón de la Barca. Prologue. The Bones Talk.
Gran died in the middle of December, on the very night of the solstice. I was 7 when she arrived, in summer, and 14 when she departed, in the midst of a snowstorm. She once told me that she lived eternally in the heart of darkest winter, where the seed is sown for the return to light. Now she became what she always was, gone down within herself, deep beneath the mountain, to hide something sacred far away from so many prying hands. I now know she had tried, in some way, to prepare me for her passing. Because I was yet so young and she so old, we could almost understand one another in a way those lost in the middle of their lives could not. My life had been an echo of hers. When I was greeted by her waxy face at the funeral, I was reminded of a night some years before, sitting in her room, our faces lit only by candlelight. Her fingers were even then like knotted wood, almost indistinguishable from the bones that she would turn over and over as she contemplated, sometimes for many minutes on end. I would try to still my desire to fidget. Never once did Gran inflict her malice on me. For me, and me alone, she had nearly eternal patience, and she demanded the entirety of my childhood in return. She might snap and nip at me, but she'd never send me away. I wanted to be the cause for a rare smile on those world-worn features. If she was quiet, she wanted me to be quiet. If she was still, then I was meant to follow suit. We never exchanged words about this, but I knew. The bones would rattle in the box, and then they'd clatter in the bowl. The heat would soon make them dance, as if animated back to life for a brief moment, rolling around with a crack and pop as the fire licked their pale edges, and the old she-bear had her fill one last time. If I ever doubted her methods, she would immediately declare, "The bones only give the shape of the future. You have to name it." Then we would squint at them some more. The skin around her eyes was like the rippled edge of a seashell. I think that even then, I understood I was for that future. A part of her had died in the past. I said my young self was an echo of who she had once been. Yet the Gran I came to know was also a mere trace of that person who persisted only to imprint herself in me. "Don't see the bones," she would say. "See what forms around them." I didn't exactly know what she meant, but was too afraid to say so. "Speak up," she said, after scrutinizing my face, which I thought was funny because I was fairly sure I hadn't said anything at all. "You speak with half words and think so quiet I can't hear you. Even an owl cannot always watch in silence. When you must, think loud. Speak loud. Make your presence known." And when she said this, her voice, her whole demeanor changed. And for a moment, I almost felt like I could see how she had survived the long winter. I would never be big or loud, I thought. That isn't me. But I nodded at her brightly and pretended as best I could. "Make yourself the ice, cracking in the wind. Make yourself the croaking crow and the mist. You're not just this little person, this little body. Make yourself known. Make yourself remembered." She patted my head, kindly but firmly. I thought she meant that one day I would grow up to be an adult. But now I know different. I would peer at the charred remains in the dying light, a scapula creased and furrowed like a walnut, or a cracked femur, and try to fathom what she saw in them. If she wanted to, she could tell me what I had for dinner the previous night with those bones. At least it seemed that way, though she only once played a parlor trick like that on me. It was almost in chastisement, as if to ask, "Are you like all the other dreamers in this sleeping world? Have I misjudged you?" My father's drinking buddies often made fun of us from the other room, though I could hear fear hidden in their voices. I held my grandmother's finger wrapped around my own, and felt some connection to a place, a people, that I'd never known. That was home. We were both exiles together, beings out of time. Now she was gone, carried aloft by some strange bird. I mouthed to her closed casket, "You left me." But even that seemed empty. Who was I saying it to? Then I looked over and saw the others in the funeral party. Left me with them. A Christian funeral. My mother's final revenge. And look at this small, stern group who had shown up to remember her. My mother, not far from the grave herself, though of course none of us knew that then, was looking out the window, watching the snow fall on the streets, listening to the honking of horns and bustle of the city, her thoughts lost in some recollection that I wasn't privy to. My father sat with the poise of a Marine, his feet flat on the floor, his face completely emotionless. But when I passed him later, I swore he smelled of whiskey. His work and drinking friends filled the pews. My mother wasn't allowed any, and I didn't want any. I felt that I would never be understood by another human being for as long as I lived. She had been dead 3 days, but it was only then that the tears poured down my cheeks. I was racked with sobs, gutted by a serrated knife. That was the hole that I lived in for a while. It wasn't until years after Gran's funeral that my own story cohered out of the neglected fragments of a stunted dream, as if my entire childhood had been a mid-afternoon nap. I was stumbling down a dark hallway, not knowing where I was going, my fingers reaching blindly for the walls, guiding my steps further into the unknown. My parents were nowhere to be found in this half-life. Merely 2 paper cutouts hung in their stead. My mother may have tried to reach me in her way, but I clamped shut my little eyes and fists and heart as tight as I could. For years I drifted aimlessly like a ghost. What else might I have done during those so-called formative years? I can scarcely recall, though I can see from photographs that I always had a book in my hand and a faint frown in my eyes, while my mouth remained like a bud that refused to open. These were fragments that I had to somehow piece together into a life. When I looked at her altar, I could almost see a place for myself. It was mine now, I had to remind myself. My altar. But behind them all loomed Gran, her dead soul intoning a final lingering note in my own, though I was too young yet to recognize the song. She had at once bestowed something upon me with her lifelong incantation and taken something else away. Freshman year, I remember only the smell of Mr. Angelson's biolab, like chemical kimchi. It had something to do with newts, whose lives consisted of basking in the noontime sun, and dead cats shipped by the dozen from the biological products supplier. It was a week before my mother's death. My cat had something inside it when we cut it open. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. I was told to stop, the teacher's voice tinged with genuine apprehension. But I reached in and pulled 3 shriveled little piglet kittens from the incision, dead as their mother. I held them all in my hand. "Are you okay?" he asked, rushing over. My classmates stared in mute shock as I stood there wondering why it was fine to cut open dead cats. But when their melon-ripe bellies revealed a trio of dead infants after the uterus sloughed away, everyone went nuts. They didn't hear the bones crunching under their feet. They only saw the dead kittens in front of them, and that was what was wrong with the world. My scalpel hovered over the triplets, like the pincer of a metal insect. The abattoir of history is always all around us. When I went to school dances, or sat in classrooms, where others heard the clamor of life, I saw only a vacant lot. I heard the regrets of all who came before, and the silence of a future without stories. The memory of the classroom fades. And so all my early adolescence went. One memory, and then another, they accumulated, waiting patiently to enter the Raven Wanderer's ledger. And I stood like a shadow beside them, behind and beneath them, trapped in the earth under my feet. After all, I am already in my grave, for otherwise, how could you be hearing my tale? The truth is, Gran had kept me from living any other life. I sat at her elbow my entire childhood, my parents just shadows on the periphery, like your ravens. But in the corners of my vision, a new reality was silently massing. Gran once told me spring hits hard. You've burrowed so far underground in the taiga that when you finally poke your head out, it almost seems like an alien landscape opening up around you. But if you rush out to greet it, that can be the end of you, because the spring is short, and the summer is coming around again, full of sweat and stinging insects. I must have forgotten that advice.
That's all for this week's episode. Stay up to date with upcoming episodes by subscribing at fallencycle.podbean.com or wherever you prefer to listen to your podcasts. Check out the work of the contributing musicians. Those links and additional information is available in the text provided along with this episode. This audio edition was produced by James Kershaw, along with text-to-speech synthesis. A statement on the use of LLMs is available on our website for those curious about how we do and don't use these technologies. This podcast is Creative Commons 3.0, Attribution, Share and Share alike, non-commercial use.